Stonehenge is not what most people think it is. I want to explain exactly what we now know, what changed recently, and why it matters. Let me start with the basics, then go deeper. Most people have a simple picture in their heads. Stone Age farmers, big rocks, a circle on a flat field, built over time through sheer effort. That picture is not wrong exactly, but it is badly incomplete. And the more carefully researchers actually measure what these people did, the more that simple picture starts to fall apart. The monument sits in Wiltshire, England, about 90 miles southwest of London. It rises from flat chalk land in a way that still makes people stop. Not because it looks beautiful, though it does, but because, by any honest measurement, it should not be standing there at all. The outer ring is made of what are called sarsen stones. Each one is over 20 feet tall. Each one weighs up to 25 tons. These people had no metal tools, no wheels built for loads like this, no cranes. They moved these stones roughly 15 miles from a place called Marlborough Downs to the north. And here is something I find genuinely impressive. In 2020, a team of geologists tested the chemistry of 52 stones. 50 of the 52 matched a single patch of ground at Marlborough Downs, not nearby, not roughly that area. One specific spot. These builders did not just grab whatever stone was close. They identified one exact source and hauled from it again and again and again. Then they did something that still surprises me when I think about it. They capped those upright stones with horizontal pieces called lintels, and they connected them using mortise and tenon joints. That is a woodworking technique. You carve a peg on one piece and a matching hole on the other, and they lock together. They did this in solid stone, with no metal tools, and the top surface of that lintel ring was leveled to within a few centimeters across the entire circle, on naturally uneven ground. Modern construction crews, with full equipment, still consider moving a single block that size a serious job. These builders set dozens of them and made them align. That is not people figuring things out as they go. That is a plan that was already fully formed before the first stone moved. Now here is where it gets more complicated. Those sarsen stones are the local ones. They only came 15 miles away. Inside that outer ring stands a second set of stones called the blue stones. Smaller, about 2 to 4 tons each. Those came from the Preseli Hills in southwest Wales, 140 miles away. No metal. No wheels for this kind of load. Just rope, timber, and a very large number of people who decided these specific stones from that specific place were worth moving across most of a country. Researchers found the exact quarry sites, named places, worked stone faces, loading platforms where pillars were levered out and lowered. This was deliberate and organized. But the distance alone is not the strangest part of the bluestone story. Some of those stones are what geologists call ringing rocks. You strike them with another stone, and instead of a dull thud, they produce a clear bell-like tone. Different stones ring at different pitches. A research project documented this in the Preseli Hills and also recorded the area's long-standing local tradition of stones that sing. Researchers have carefully suggested, and I want to be clear, this is a hypothesis rather than settled fact, that the blue stones may have been selected partly for how they sounded. That someone walked those hills, striking stone after stone, and kept only the ones that rang with the right tone. If that is even partially true, these were not just building materials. They may have been instruments, and the team that went to Wales to get them included someone with a trained ear. That is a completely different picture from the one I grew up with. Then there is the stone that changed everything most recently. At the absolute center of Stonehenge lies a pale sandstone slab, about 16 feet long, weighing around 6 tons. It is called the altar stone, which is a dramatic name for something that nobody really understood for over a century. The working assumption was simple. It sits among the blue stones. The blue stones are Welsh, so the altar stone must be Welsh too. That explanation got written down and repeated until it sounded like proven fact. But nobody had actually tested it. So a team of geologists tested it. They used tiny fragments of the stone, including a piece chipped off in 1844. They did not look at the stone's appearance. They read the chemistry of individual mineral grains locked inside it. Zircon, apatite, rutile. Each grain is essentially a small clock. It records when and where it first crystallized. The team compared those mineral fingerprints against the bedrock geology of Britain and Ireland, region by region. The match was not in Wales. It was not in southern England. The grains matched the old red sandstone of the Orcadian Basin in the far northeast of Scotland. This result was published in the journal Nature in 2024. The 6-ton stone at the center of Stonehenge had traveled at least 430 miles from the top corner of Scotland down to the south of England. The researchers, led by geoscientist Anthony Clark, identified this as the longest recorded journey of any stone used in any Neolithic monument anywhere on Earth. Think about what 430 miles meant with no roads, no iron, no wheeled transport capable of bearing 6 tons. The most plausible explanation the researchers offer is that it was not dragged overland at all. It was loaded onto some kind of vessel and moved by sea around the coast of Britain. A 6-ton slab riding the open ocean for hundreds of miles. To me, this is one of the most important single finds at Stonehenge in decades. Because if that is what happened, the altar stone is some of the oldest solid evidence we have for serious long-distance sea travel in Britain. These were people capable of loading 6 tons onto some kind of raft or lashed hull, something that left no trace in any surviving record, and keeping that load afloat around hundreds of miles of genuinely dangerous coastline. That requires seamanship, logistical planning, and coordination between communities hundreds of miles apart who somehow shared a single purpose. The Stonehenge of the postcards, the isolated ring on an empty field, was never the real thing, and modern survey technology has now proved that beyond any serious doubt. Starting around 2010, An international team ran ground-penetrating radar and magnetometers across roughly 14 square kilometers of land surrounding Stonehenge. They mapped everything lying beneath the surface without removing a single spade of earth. What they found under what looked like empty fields was astonishing. 15 to 17 previously unrecorded monuments. Hundreds of smaller features nobody had ever documented. A massive timber building associated with the dead. Burial mounds, pit alignments, ring ditches, processional features, structure after structure lying directly beneath the feet of every researcher who had ever walked that ground without knowing it was there. Two discoveries from that survey stand out most clearly to me. About 2 miles from Stonehenge sits a large earthwork called Durrington Walls. The radar found something buried beneath its bank. A row of up to 90 enormous standing stones, many of them toppled and then deliberately covered over. Some still surviving at lengths exceeding 14 feet underground. A hidden stone monument swallowed by a later earthwork. Nobody knew it was there. Durrington Walls also revealed something else when excavations were carried out. The remains of one of the largest Neolithic settlements ever found in Northern Europe. Houses, hearths, enormous amounts of animal bone, cattle and pigs, processed and consumed at a scale that points to massive seasonal gatherings. The people who built Stonehenge appear to have lived and feasted at Durrington Walls. The current thinking, confirmed by multiple researchers, is that Durrington and Stonehenge functioned as two parts of a single system. Durrington in timber for the living, Stonehenge in stone for the ancestors and the dead, connected by the River Avon and by ceremonial avenues running down to the water on each side. Then the survey traced something around Durrington that nobody expected at all. A ring of enormous pits, each roughly 16 feet deep and 65 feet across, set in a circle nearly 2 kilometers wide. Individual pits had been noticed over the years and dismissed as natural depressions. Once the full survey mapped them together, they resolved into a single deliberate design more than a mile across, one of the largest prehistoric structures ever identified in Britain. Hidden for thousands of years because no human being standing on flat ground could ever have seen enough of it at once to recognize what it was. Only the data made it visible. Now let me explain what the monument does to sound, because this part surprised me most. We tend to imagine Stonehenge in silence, ancient stone in open wind, but it was built to be stood inside, and its shape does something very specific to sound. Researchers, including Trevor Cox and Bruno Fazenda, built a complete physical scale model of Stonehenge at 1/12 of its original size, with every stone in the position it would have occupied around 4,000 years ago when the monument was still largely intact. They placed it in an acoustic test chamber and measured exactly how sound behaved inside it. The same method used to test a concert hall before it gets built. What came back was specific and measurable. The intact monument produced a reverberation time approaching 2/3 of a second. That is significant for a structure with no roof, wide gaps between stones, and every apparent reason to just bleed sound into open air. Instead, the stones captured it and kept it moving within the ring. A voice from the center was measurably amplified by about 4 decibels for people standing inside, and almost no sound propagated outward to anyone standing beyond the stones. What that means, practically, is this. The architecture created a hard boundary between inside and outside using sound. If you stood within the ring, while voices or drums or chanting filled the space, the sound would have surrounded you from every direction, reinforced, immediate, present. If you stood just outside, you would have heard almost nothing. The inner space could hold perhaps 50 people at most. This was not designed for crowds. It was designed for a small group, and the design made certain that small group felt the sound in a way that had no obvious explanation. It would not have felt like architecture. It would have felt like the stones themselves were responding. These people understood, by patient observation, how stone shapes sound, well enough to build a space where sound behaved exactly as intended. They were doing acoustics thousands of years before anyone wrote the principles down. The monument also encodes something about the sky. The main axis points to sunrise on the summer solstice and sunset on the winter solstice. That alignment is confirmed and has never been seriously doubted. But there is a second alignment that is currently being actively investigated. 4 stones, called the station. Stones are positioned to form a rectangle. The short sides of that rectangle appear to align with what astronomers call a major lunar standstill. That is the point in the moon's 18.6-year cycle when it rises and sets at its widest extreme positions along the horizon. The last standstill peaked at the very end of 2024, and across 2024 into 2025, English heritage and archaeoastronomers from Oxford, Leicester, and Bournemouth ran a dedicated observational program to test whether those station stones genuinely frame those extreme moonrise and moonset positions in real time. The honest state of that research right now is that it is still being worked through. The alignment looks real. Whether it was deliberately encoded is still being tested. But tracking a cycle that long requires something remarkable. The moon's full swing takes over 18 years. To catch it at all required multiple generations of watchers, one group marking where the moon stood, the next generation measuring against those marks, passing the work forward across spans of time that test the outer limits of what any group can hold in memory. If the alignment is intentional, these builders were encoding both the sun and the moon into a single structure, a unified map of the sky pressed into stone on an English chalk plane. And there is still the question of the 56 pits called the Aubrey Holes, named after John Aubrey, who first recorded them in the 1660s. They run in a ring just inside the outer bank. Astronomer Gerald Hawkins proposed in the 1960s, using one of the first mainframe computers, that these 56 pits functioned as a kind of lunar calendar. By moving markers around the holes in a defined pattern, he argued, you could track solar and lunar cycles and predict eclipses years ahead. Many archaeologists remain genuinely skeptical Because we cannot reconstruct what people intended when they left no written record. I am not saying this is confirmed. It is not. But the fact that we are seriously debating whether people 5,000 years ago built a functional eclipse predictor out of chalk pits says something important about how far our picture of these people has shifted. What the technology of the last decade actually did was not produce a single dramatic answer. It organized centuries of separated evidence into one picture that humans could finally see all at once. A 2012 laser scan uncovered axe head carvings on the stones that nobody had spotted by eye. It also showed that stones facing the solstice axis were finished far more precisely than stones behind them. Mineral analysis traced the altar stone 430 miles to Scotland. Ground-penetrating radar revealed a ceremonial landscape stretching for miles around the monument. And when machine learning systems were fed decades of accumulated scans, measurements, and field records, they began drawing connections across datasets that no single researcher had ever been able to hold together simultaneously. What emerged from all of that is not one discovery. It is a revised picture of who these people were. They were not isolated farmers grabbing nearby rocks. They were a society organized enough to maintain a building project across nearly 1,000 years, connected enough to bring specific stone from Scotland, Wales, and Marlborough Downs to a single point in southern England, sophisticated enough to level stone lintels to within centimeters on uneven ground, using no metal tools, capable enough to move 6 tons of stone by sea, precise enough in their sky watching to encode an 18-year lunar cycle into stone positions, and patient enough to pass that level of precision forward across more than 30 generations without writing a single word of it down. The way I understand it now, the hardest question is not how. The how, difficult as it is at least something technology can help us trace. The hard question is why. Why spend centuries on this? Why bring stone from the top of Scotland? Why select stones that ring at specific pitches? Why build a space where sound wraps around a small group in the dark? We can trace the stones now. We can map the landscape. We can measure the acoustics and test the alignments. But we still cannot read the belief that made all of it feel necessary. That part is still invisible. And for me, that is actually the most interesting thing about Stonehenge right now. The machines can tell us what these people built. They cannot tell us what these people believed. And the gap between those two things is where the real mystery still lives. So for me, the main thing is this. Stonehenge was not a simple monument built by simple people. It was the visible center of a vast, organized, and connected world that we are only just beginning to see clearly.